Good evening, Students on Ice alumni. This is our last session of the day. Today we have Liam Brennan in with us. Liam, how are you doing?
I'm great, thanks. Hi, everybody.
So Liam was an alumni on our 2024 K&N expedition. He is a fantastic photographer. I guess we got a little bit of an interesting fact is our banner on the front page of our event Moby is actually a picture that Liam took for us from Beachy Island. Is that correct?
That's right.
Yeah. So he took that when he was on expedition in 2024. So I guess we can let you start off your slides, Liam, if you're all ready.
Right on. Thank you so much. So, hi, everybody. I'm excited to share some early results from my master's, where I'm kind of pursuing a scientific and creative project at the same time, and it's taking place at the University of New Brunswick. So, as Scotty said, my name's Liam. I'm an ecologist and photographer and alumni of Students on Ice. And I'd like to start today just by acknowledging that I currently sit on the unsurrendered, unceded territory of the Wolastoqey people, as established in a series of peace and friendship treaties, and that my work has taken me across the waters and lands of nations of the Wabanaki Confederacy. And I mention this just to acknowledge the historical and ongoing colonial forces that continue to shape our institutions and kind of contextualize my personal relationship with my project and my research. I'm very grateful to have spent time working and living along the shores of the Atlantic Ocean and the Bay of Fundy, and attribute my kind of ongoing commitment to ecological and social justice to the time and the privilege of time I've been able to spend in wild places along wild coastlines like the Bay of Fundy. And going forward, I really hope this project and others, I can continue to be committed to adopting interdisciplinary and inclusive science and science communication with the distinct intention of creating human-environment relationships which are grounded in ecological and social justice. So as an overview of the talk I would like to give today, I'm going to start just by mentioning a little bit about my scientific research so you can get some background. I'll then move into kind of science communication generally, what it means to me and what I found in some of my research, and then highlight some of the elements of the creative project I'm trying to pursue alongside this scientific work. So I want to start today in Ilulissat. So as Scotty mentioned last summer, I was in the high Arctic, and here I have an image of one of the participants. His name's Cruz from Mi'kma'ki, and he's walking along the shore, kind of the edge here of the Ilulissat ice fjord. And behind him is this large freshwater iceberg. So this is a unique place in Greenland where a huge amount of freshwater ice moves out into the Atlantic Ocean. And I remember spending time here reflecting and thinking, oh my God, this is directly related to what I'm going to go start studying at the University of New Brunswick. So the next images I've shown here, which you kind of can't right see it, my name is just covering it, but right where the N in my last name is at Brennan, that's the dot of the Bay of Fundy. And that's the dot where this image of this whale was taken this past summer. So hopefully kind of at the start of this talk, I can help explain how these two images are related. So to back up a little bit, this focal species that I'm interested in studying is called the North Atlantic right whale. It's this large black baleen whale, and it uses the baleen or plates in its mouth to eat this very small species of zooplankton called a copepod. So if you've ever seen like a whale shark, it's swimming through the water with its mouth open, finding these really tiny microscopic food. And what's kind of important about the right whale is that they're critically endangered. Their populations are about 370 individuals, and we're talking specifically about the North Atlantic right whale that, yeah, spends time along the eastern seaboard of Canada and the US. While the right whale kind of spans this whole eastern seaboard, the Bay of Fundy, specifically where my work is located, has historically supported large numbers of right whales in the summer and fall months where they fed on this abundance of that food source, this copepod, little zooplankton species. The thing is, however, is that copepods and right whales are subject to something that we call climate scale regime shifts. And it's a big scary word, but roughly what it means is that every decade or so, the whole ecosystem is in a roughly like steady state. And that steady state is influenced directly by the competing influence of different large-scale current systems. On this slide, I've highlighted two large current systems, the Gulf Stream in red, bringing warm, salty water north, and the Labrador Current System, which brings cooler, fresher water south. And this cooler, fresher water is influenced by what's going on in the Arctic. And if I think back to Ilulissat and those huge quantities of fresh water that are dumping into the North Atlantic, that's a lot of fresh water that hasn't been there. And there's more fresh water up there because of climate change, because of the melting of that ice. So that sort of influx of fresh water has been shown to be disrupting some of these current systems and having an impact on this Gulf of Maine and Bay of Fundy system and influencing where right whales can find their food. So if I go back over the past year, those two images can really help summarize the image from Ilulissat and the image of the right whale in the Bay of Fundy can really help summarize the reason I'm doing this work and the reason I'm here. This also brings me to my research question, where I'm interested in understanding how recent concentrations of right whale prey, or right whale food, this zooplankton, compare to the historical conditions in the Bay of Fundy. To help answer these questions, we use a variety of scientific methods. I've included two images here from our fieldwork that took place just about a month ago. On the bottom image, you can see a group of 4 people, myself included. I'm in gray there. I'm just doing the data. I'm doing the easy job. I'm just recording data in that case. But my 3 coworkers are kind of gaffing this huge, long multi-net. And you can just see the nets kind of swaying in the wind there. But that's a series of 5 nets, which collects physical samples of the zooplankton that we can take back to the lab at different depths in the water column. So that's that way we get the physical samples right back. And on the right-hand side, there's the 2 people with that cage. That's a UVP, or underwater vision profiler, which is just a camera. It takes really high frequency photos of the microscopic plankton in the water column. So in that case, we can deploy that a lot. We can drop that camera up and down, and collect a ton of data about the plankton in the water column. And yeah, with this camera, the UVP, I've made these 2 maps. We can get a huge amount of data and really high resolution information about where the right whale food is and how the quantity of right whale food may compare to historical estimates. So up on the top there, I have like these 2 grids. So we have these randomly sampling 4x4 grids, one that's in more coastal habitat and one that's situated in Grand Manan Basin, just kind of off the coast of Grand Manan there. And then below that, I have the whole depth profiles. So you can almost imagine you're swimming through the ocean like a whale, and all of those sort of like yellow, red, and orange dots are places where we've sampled the amount of food. So we can kind of build these 3D understandings of how right whale food is distributed both like through space at the surface and at depth. And I love the science. I'm a nerd. I love spending time really thinking about how all these different data sets fit together. But the science is only one part of it. And I'd argue that a photo like this, a photo of me at like midnight working really hard, I feel like this helps convey the passion. This helps convey the difficulty of conducting some of this work. And maybe an image like this can tell an important science communication story alongside the data that I'm working on collecting in this image. And that brings me, more broadly to why I like to communicate science. There's lots of research that shows that science communication actually makes for better science. In cases where people advertise their work, they're more likely for their work to be incorporated into other people's work. And oftentimes when you're communicating your work to a broad audience, you actually improve your understanding yourself, and you may get new ideas about how to move it forward. And just more generally, humans are kind of social, emotional creatures. It's rare that the hard facts really change our mind. So I think it often takes multiple streams of knowing to really change someone's mind or really initiate action. And if we think specifically about conservation and communication in conservation, it's worth mentioning that the Canadian government and internationally, we've spent tons of money investing in conservation management and conservation research, but the biodiversity crisis persists. And I think this can be at least partially be attributed to the gap between what collectively we know in all of our different ways of knowing and what collectively we're able to actually put into action. And in the literature, this is called the knowledge action gap. I think it's a useful framework for kind of thinking about some of the issues we deal with going forward in this talk. And just more generally, I think conservation is a wicked problem, whether you're trying to conserve right whales in the ocean or caribou on land. There's a kind of a complex interplay of different societal, ecological, and economic factors that shape these problems. And if the problems are complex, I advocate for the solutions also being complex and interdisciplinary to sort of meet the moment. If we think specifically about the role of digital media in science and science communication, um, imagery, like some of the images I've shared, can help condense complex information and create those emotional appeals. And what's interesting is that if you think about a lot of the forms of science, everyone in my lab, we all use a variety of different images in our everyday. I talked about images of tiny little plankton. There's people in my lab who use images of like acoustic signals on graphs, and there's people who use satellite images in my lab as well. So all that to say, we often are using imagery in our day-to-day life, so maybe it can easily be used for science communication purposes as well. When we think about what makes for effective science communication, it's important that like it embeds careful messaging and it can be facilitated by a coherent narrative. It's important to also consider your audience and what sort of messaging format you're using to best address this audience, and it's good to have an emotional appeal. And all of this background that I've shared about myself, my passion for science, and more creative ways of thinking really helped led me to this Trebek initiative. This is in honor of the late Alex Trebek, who hosted Jeopardy, and is a collaboration between Canadian National Geographic. And their mission is to use the power of science exploration, education, and storytelling to illuminate and protect the wonder of our world. I was extremely fortunate to receive one of these grants a few months ago, and they've helped support me reframe some of my work and really get excited about doing both the science and the creative elements for my project. So the goal of my project is to create a compelling portfolio of images, and then I hope to combine images, video, and data visualization all together. And I'm also working with some filmmakers to create a short film to help share the story of our work. And I share here a photo of me. I think this is midnight in Disco Bay, taking images. So I've been able to take some images and settings that look a little bit like this, and I hope to continue to do that. And this sort of photos have taken place concurrently while I've been doing the field work for the science. And I've been thinking about using employing narratives of climate change and ecological resilience. And you really think about, how do I capture change in an image? It's a pretty hard thing because an image is a snapshot in time. But I'm really thinking creatively about how I can take what I know about the science and then portray that in some of my photos. And I've also been working with filmmakers. We had someone join us on board, and a thought is that there will be kind of those themes of personal journey and discovery. And what's interesting is that I'm working to collaborate with an Indigenous media group on this section of my project too. And I've just identified that, this is maybe an area where I can really bring in diverse viewpoints in the sort of creative element. Sometimes it's harder in ocean science, I'm in a very condensed academic timeline, but you can kind of broaden the scope in the creative sense to bring in more voices that way as well. So the anticipated impact of my work is that I'm going to create scientific research, the photographs, and the video that will hopefully contribute to the public's understanding of climate change and aid in gaining political support for conservation. And then I'm also hoping to kind of create this interdisciplinary community of all these different people who I've relied on to help support my project. Hopefully they can continue to think about conservation work in a very interdisciplinary framework. With that, I'd like to thank the many, many people who have been instrumental in ensuring this work has been successful. It includes everyone on my committee, everyone in my lab, and all the folks who helped out with fieldwork, as well as to the numerous organizations who've helped funded our work. Thank you very much.
Wow, Liam, buddy, that was great.
Thank you.
Thanks for digging into that. You've done some cool stuff with the whales.
Mhm.
What ship were you working on there when that picture was taken?
That's just a lobster fishing vessel based out of Campobello Island. So we
Okay.
run a very a lean operation, but we can manage. It means a lot of lifting, heavy oceanographic gear, because we don't have that whole A-frame. We just that comes up and down. So yeah, we managed to do it all just on a lobster boat.
Wow.
Yeah.
How many scientists were on board?
Just kind of the group of us, like usually about 4 or 5. But we just do day trips. It's all pretty nice and coastal.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, Eric has a question for you there.
Do you find the one?
Creative data outputs have been blurred.
It's a great question, Eric. Yeah, it is hard to sometimes blur the lines, and then I guess the other biggest thing for me maybe is making personal boundaries. Photography's always been like a personal escape for me to like relax and for it to not be work. But if I'm just always collecting data, it sometimes feels like it can kind of just all become a job. So that's a personal challenge as well, because, and it's a little bit meta to think of it could all be science or it could all not be science. When I think about at the end of the day, if you're taking an image, you're just collecting photons, you're just collecting data. And it's just thinking about whether you're doing it in a really like strict scientific framework or if you're doing it in a more lax framework. But you're right. I think even in the most scientific context, like that figure I showed, there can be lots of beauty, and hopefully that's something I can explore in my creative project where I can bring these different scientific and creative elements together. What's the biggest challenge you faced? Thanks, Michaela. One of the largest challenges was moving into the world of oceanography. I spent a lot of my undergrad working more on terrestrial systems. So uh, I think studying, maybe the biggest challenge is studying the oceans really, really hard. Um, ocean scientists have to work with so many difficult realities of, it's really high pressure, gear often breaks, and the amount of sort of care that goes into maintaining oceanographic instruments to ensure that salt water doesn't get in, and they have to be super calibrated. So I think in general the biggest challenge of my research is that I'm studying the ocean, and that there's been a really steep learning curve for me to learn to understand and collect oceanographic data. It's fun, I love it, but it's been a challenge for sure.
I guess the endangered species makes it also very difficult to.
Oh, Scotty, yeah, that's a huge challenge. I didn't totally. I wanted to keep it kind of tight, but I shared that photo of a right whale, which I actually took while I was out, working on the photograph piece. So I managed to see one of 3 right whales that was seen all year in the Bay of Fundy, and I just happened to be there at the right time at the right moment. And then we went out and did all this research. We had all this information, all this instruments to measure the habitat. We never saw a right whale just a couple weeks later. So that's a huge issue is that it's the ocean, that it's an endangered species. And just in general, like the ocean is so vast, their habitat is so vast that to actually find them is a huge challenge.
Yeah, I have a question here. Can you go into why facts don't work well for people? How can we move the minds to goals and actions guided by science and logic? By Surya.
Yeah, I referenced a couple papers there. I can send you those papers because they know a lot more about the human psychology than I do. It's not exactly my area of expertise, but I think just generally is that especially in a polarized world and the online environment we're all engaging with, like it's easy to see how what we may perceive as absolute truths or facts can quickly get distorted or totally discredited. And I think as humans, there's way too much information in the world. The internet's full of information, so naturally our brains kind of take these shortcuts. I think there's a famous economist and philosopher. His name's Daniel Kahneman. He wrote a book called Thinking Fast and Slow, and his whole book is about how humans make these like mental shortcuts, or what he calls heuristics, these heuristics. So I think a lot of time, if you really appreciate someone's story, if you understand where they're coming from, you're more likely to believe them, whether or not even all the facts like line up as whether or not they're a credible person. So by that I just mean we're kind of social and emotional, and there's almost too much information for us to really grasp. So a lot of times what changed people's mind is sort of these stories and these more creative or maybe less super scientific ways of knowing. Thanks, Mac. I love citizen, and I think increasingly we're going to move to call it community science, just to recognize that you don't have to be a citizen of a certain country to contribute. And I'm a major advocate of community science. I think it really helps fill in the gaps where, this research is really expensive. Like there was so much involved in collecting this sort of information where, community science can be a little more affordable, I suppose, but it also really helps bring everybody along in the scientific process. So number one, you just create such an abundance of data, but also the science becomes kind of self-educating, in that the people who are collecting the data are probably learning a lot about the data as well. And if I think of a platform like iNaturalist, which I'm an avid iNaturalist user, the best thing is that there's sort of some feedback, right? You can take an image and there's a group of online experts who can help tell you what you've seen. So if you can create that loop of not only adding to the scientific record, but also adding to the scientific education amongst people, community members, I think that can be a super powerful tool. The question, of course, is how can the science catch up to really use that information? You can imagine if you just have people kind of haphazardly collecting data, you have a lot of presence data where something occurs, but you don't necessarily have the absence data where stuff isn't. And to make scientific inference, that can be an important piece. But I think the science has come a long way, and I'm excited to see how community science can continue to be a factor for change.
Thanks, Mac, for putting the iNaturalist website on the chat there. Hazel also asked the question: where did you take photography, or are you self-taught?
I am a self-taught photographer. I learned on YouTube, is what I tell people. And YouTube, and the funny anecdote actually is that as a child I took piano lessons. I did not like piano lessons, but I had two brothers who also had to take piano lessons. So every day I went to piano all throughout my childhood. I would sit in a Chapters, because there's a Chapters bookstore right next door to where I took piano lessons. And I wouldn't buy any of the books, but I would just read these photography magazines for an hour every day of my childhood. So I guess YouTube, and then also free magazines at Chapters was where I learned. But it's a lot of trial and error. And I think because it's a creative thing, like it's hard to say if you're ever doing it wrong. Maybe, because there's always an angle and there's always a lot of trial and error involved. And it doesn't have to be crazy expensive. Most of my images on my website, and until SOI, I was using photographic equipment that was older than me. So it doesn't have to be crazy expensive, and it is a lot about the trial and error. And something that I'm increasingly learning is what makes a good photograph, or what makes something that I'm proud of, is more if I've thought about it, and less actually how the photo's executed. It's more if there's a story behind it that I think makes for a good image.
I think there's a talent and fun in that right angle, though, and that right depth. I think you got it, buddy.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that, Scotty.
Did any other folks have any questions to bring up to Liam? Well, if you want to see more of Liam's stuff, you should check him out on his social medias. And and everybody go back and make sure they have a good look at the our main screen photo on Eventmo, because it's a gorgeous picture. But thank you so much today, Liam. Appreciate your session.
Thanks, Scotty. Thanks, everybody.
And we'll see everybody tomorrow for our final day of the summit.